At that time, I set two new goals for our country. The first was getting 70% of adults by July the 4th. The second was having 160 million Americans of all ages by that same date. I'm pleased to report we've made strong progress on the adult efforts in just the past few days.
Folks, President Biden is planning on providing millions of Americans with an additional stimulus check. Several states are now requiring workers to file a tax return in order to receive an extra payment, and they might even increase your Social Security benefits by $200 a month. But first, everybody, I want to say this. California Governor Gavin Newsom is now thinking about a massive surplus and hopes to send out a second, larger round of stimulus checks to residents. During a recent interview, Newsom said, "It's a remarkable turnaround. California's progressive tax structure means the state budget suffered early in the crisis, but quickly rebounded. Californians making between $30,000 to $75,000 are set to receive a $600 stimulus check. And then, families with at least one child will get an extra $500 payment. And that means some families could qualify to receive up to $1,100 altogether. State law requires that taxpayers get a rebate when a budget surplus hits a certain size, which has only happened once in California in more than 40 years. So folks, the IRS says that there are thousands of Americans that can receive an additional $1,200 stimulus check. In this video, I'll be going over how you can receive more financial relief from the federal government, as well as what President Biden and many of our politicians in Congress are doing to pass a fourth stimulus check. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I truly appreciate everyone's amazing support. And before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Arkansas just became the third state to announce plans to cancel the extra $300 per week federal benefits the unemployed people are receiving. The state joined Montana and South Carolina, who had announced a similar decision last week, and reflects a new Republican strategy aimed to push more people back to work. Kevin Brady, the top Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, said on Friday, more states are predicted to follow. Ever since the CARES Act was passed in 2020, folks, Republicans had argued that these supplemental federal unemployment benefits were a disincentive to return to work. According to new spending rules released by the United States Department of Treasury on Monday, millions of Americans may be eligible to receive another cash stimulus from the state or local government as part of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. The new spending rules outline guidance on a state and local fiscal recovery fund. The relief bill now includes $350 billion in direct flexible aid to states, counties, and cities. Among the more than 150 pages of guidance is a section knowing that governments can use the recovery funds for direct assistance to households and populations facing negative economic impacts due to the crisis, including cash assistance. The Treasury Department says that cash assistance checks could be similar to the amounts previously provided by the federal government over the last year. Those amounts range between $600 and $1,400 per individual, depending on when they were issued. The U.S. Treasury said that cash transfers, or grossly in excess of such amounts, would be outside the scopes of eligible uses under the ARPA law.
It is no secret that as a nation we face enormous needs. Over 90 million Americans today are uninsured or underinsured. Almost 600,000 Americans are homeless. Our child care system is dysfunctional, and we have one of the highest rates of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. And I think we are all in agreement that our roads and our bridges and our infrastructure are in terrible shape. And in my view, we face the existential threat of addressing climate change, which could wreak havoc on our country and the world. In other words, there is an enormous amount of work that has to be done, and much of that work will be very expensive. For that reason, we as members of Congress have the responsibility to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and that they are spent cost effectively. And that is true whether the issue is healthcare or education or anything else. It is certainly true when it comes to the Department of Defense, an agency with a budget of $740 billion, by far the largest spending category in our discretionary budget, consuming more than half of all discretionary spending. In my view, the time is long overdue for us to take a hard look at the enormous amount of waste, at the cost overruns, at the fraud, and at the financial mismanagement that has plagued the Department of Defense and the military-industrial complex for decades. And today, that is exactly what we will be doing. At a time when we have so many unmet needs in America, we've got to ask ourselves why we are spending more on the military than the next 12 nations combined. Why is it that the United States of America is now spending more on the military in real inflationary adjusted dollars than we did during the height of the Cold War or during the wars in Vietnam and Korea? Why is it that the Pentagon remains the only agency in the federal government that cannot pass an independent audit 30 years after Congress required it to do so? How does it happen that about half of the $740 billion annual defense budget goes not to our troops? Many people think that it does, but it doesn't. But to defense contractors, while virtually all of them have paid huge fines for misconduct and fraud while making massive profits on those contracts. As it happens, since 1995, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon have paid over $5.4 billion in fines or related settlements for fraud or misconduct. Further, I find it interesting that despite the fact that the lion's share of revenue for some of the defense contractors comes from the taxpayers of the United States, these same companies provide their CEOs and executives excessive and extremely large compensation packages. Last year, Lockheed Martin paid its CEO over $23 million, while 95% of its revenue came from defense contracts. Raytheon paid its CEO $19.4 million, while 94% of its revenue came from defense contracts. Boeing paid its CEO $21 million, while 45% of its revenue came from defense contracts. In other words, these companies, for all intents and purposes, almost function as government agencies, the vast majority of their revenue coming from the public, and yet their CEOs make over 100 times more than the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America. And I think one of the issues that we have to also take a look at is the whole question of the revolving door, where many of our top military officials end up on the boards of directors of these major defense companies.